Imagine that you live in a neighborhood where everything is peaceful, except for this one neighbor that seems like a loner, yet he or she is very irritating and doesn't like to be intruded upon. This is the analogy that is produced in Lars Schoultz's novel called The Infernal Little Cuban Republic, the United States and the Cuban Revolution. Schoultz is a political science professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and was the president of the Latin American Studies Association. He is very knowledgeable about U.S.-Cuban relations, and his book is a must-read. The following book review will critique the more general outliers of Schoultz's analysis of the United States' involvement in the Cuban Revolution, starting with the presidency of Harry Truman until the previous Bush administration. I will also analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the book according to my own knowledge and opinion. Since the book covers a wide array of material, I will focus on the high points of the Cuban Revolution, such as the beginnings of the revolution, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and where the United States stands now in regards to relations with Cuba during the current Obama administration. First, it would be best to take a brief look at the grassroots history of the Cuban Revolution, so one will gain a better understanding of the United States' involvement. The Cuban Revolution began on July 26, 1953, when Fidel Castro's forces attacked the military barracks at Santiago and Bayamo. Fidel and his brother Raul were both captured and sentenced to prison. The president and dictator at the time, Fulgencio Batista, was supported by the United States. So this begs the question, why would the United States support a tyrant during the World War II and post-World War II era? One must understand during the late 1940s and 1950s, the United States developed an obsession to end communism because it intruded upon the idea of capitalism, which the United States heavily promoted. Batista was known as anti-communist and pro-business. Batista allowed American businesses and wealthy Americans to move in, which made Cuba a luxurious place to live. The United States saw Batista as someone who had American interests at heart, and as someone who hated communism as much as the United States did. The Roosevelt and Truman administrations both approved of Batista's views and leadership, because Batista welcomed American enterprise which benefited the United States. Eventually, on December 31, 1958, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara's forces won the Battle of Santa Clara, which forced Batista to take refuge in the Dominican Republic, and Fidel Castro assumed the role of Prime Minister in 1959. The book begins to take off by discussing the Cuban Revolution during the first 8 years of the Eisenhower administration. President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon were two leaders who also embraced President Batista, despite his cruel and inhumane agendas. According to Schoultz, Vice President Nixon called Batista, quote, "wonderful man." The Eisenhower era was the era when the Cold War, communism, and anti-communism propaganda were beginning to sweep the nation and the world. And the Eisenhower administration did not want someone like Castro to overthrow an anti-communist regime like Batista's. Castro began to become a thorn on the United States' side when he began to take all American-owned land in Cuba and redistribute it to the low-class Cubans. This made the Eisenhower administration question Castro's economic policies, and the administration began to tie Castro with communism. The book discusses when Castro visited the United States shortly after the revolution in April 1959. Castro went to the United States in order to discreetly ask the United States for loans to help restore their diminished economy and to perhaps make ends meet with the United States. However, Eisenhower did not meet with Castro and decided to go on a golfing trip instead. However, Vice President Nixon met with Castro instead, and Castro left the impression with Nixon that he may or may not have been a communist, but Nixon eventually concluded that Cuba was, quote, being driven towards communism. By the end of 1959, the book discusses how relations with Cuba began to go south. The Eisenhower administration chose not to give Castro any assistance because of his possible communist affiliations and economic policies. The CIA director Alan Dulles even proposed to cut down the purchasing of sugar from Cuba if they chose not to change their economic policies. Eisenhower took Dulles' advice, and it backfired when Castro began to trade and export to communist countries in Eastern Europe, such as the Soviet Union. Schoultz downplays the Eisenhower administration of failing to act harshly enough on Castro's regime. However, one must realize the tricky position Eisenhower and Nixon were in. If they were too harsh on Cuba, it would have resulted in a premature alliance with the Soviet Union. An alliance with the Soviet Union would have put the United States at risk by having a Soviet Union ally just a few miles south of Miami. It is my opinion, along with Schoultz's, that Eisenhower did make a mistake by not meeting with Castro and attempting to mend issues between Cuba and the United States. By 1960, Vice President Nixon was running for president against a man who would be a crucial figure in the Cuban Revolution, John F. Kennedy. Kennedy ultimately won the election and was briefed on the current situation with Cuba, which relations were diminished significantly since Castro's visit the year prior. Before Kennedy's inauguration, Eisenhower ordered the embassy in Havana to be shut down and began to institute an embargo on imported Cuban goods. And there was practically a total embargo on Cuba towards the end of the Kennedy administration. In the next section of the book, Schoultz analyzes the failure of the Kennedy administration to successfully execute an invasion of Cuba known as the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs is one of the United States' most embarrassing moments because it showed that America could not kill the pesky insect flying around the house, so to speak. Given the United States' size and strength, one could imagine that the CIA or military could dismantle the Cuban forces in a matter of hours. In the Bay of Pigs invasion, it was not the case. The Bay of Pigs invasion was in the planning stages during the final stretch of the Eisenhower administration, and the CIA implored Kennedy to go forward with the invasion, and Kennedy was briefed on the situation on January 28, 1961. Eisenhower thought the invasion was aimed to give the Cuban people a new regime that was, quote, more devoted to the true interest of the Cuban people. There were 3 landing sites that circled the Bay of Pigs. The first landing site was called Playa Garón, codenamed Blue Beach, Playa Lugar, codenamed Red Beach, and Caleta Buena Inlet, codenamed Green Beach. Recruiting for the invasion began in April 1960 when the CIA recruited hundreds of Cuban exiles who fled from Castro's regime. The official invasion began on April 16, 1961. Once the CIA forces reached the beaches, the Cuban forces were waiting for them, which resulted in a disaster for the United States. Debate still continues about how Castro knew the invasion was coming. Schoultz claimed Cuba's intelligence forces were in Miami at the time the invasion was being planned. Other sources claim that the Soviet Union knew the invasion was coming and let Castro know. Once he heard of the chaos that was ensuing, President Kennedy was given the choice to send the Air Force reinforcements in, but he declined. When the invasion was over 90 exiles were killed, with 1,179 taken as prisoner. Schoultz even mentioned an interesting fact that Castro was willing to trade prisoners for 500 bulldozers, because it would help peasant farmers work their farmland. When it was all said and done, the CIA embarrassed the Kennedy administration, and Kennedy took a hatred for the CIA to his grave. To magnify the embarrassment even more, Che Guevara thanked Kennedy for the invasion through Kennedy's speechwriter Richard Goodwin, because it strengthened a sense of Cuban nationalism. Schoultz noted that it was a major political victory for Cuba because it showed that Cuba was just more than a tiny island south of Miami. Schoultz noted that the Bay of Pigs victory was when Cuban nationalism reached its peak. In the years and administrations following Kennedy, relations with Cuba remained pretty stagnant and abysmal. During the Johnson and Nixon administrations, the fight against communism was taken in North Vietnam. During the Carter and Ford administrations, Cuba remained a rogue and estranged nation that did not trust the United States since the Bay of Pigs. Also, during the Carter administration, the Soviet Union began to come back into play when they invaded Afghanistan unsuccessfully. And there was an Iran hostage crisis consuming the country. The Reagan administration focused almost all the attention back to the Soviet Union. However, Reagan did see Cuba as a communist threat and tightened the embargo on Cuba, and did not allow American citizens to spend money in Cuba. The previous Bush administration also supported a tiger embargo with Cuba and referred to Cuba as a, quote, an outpost of tyranny. With regard to current relations with Cuba, things are starting to look a little better. President Obama has said he is willing to work with Cuba if they change their political outlook. Obama also signed into law spending bills that make trade relations less as strict as they were before, and has made travel to and from Cuba easier. Just this past July, Raul Castro said that he is willing to negotiate with the United States. The overall point of the book was Schoultz claiming that the United States has been unfair to Cuba and has not tried to develop a good relationship with Castro. I believe his point is very evident after reading his book. There were times that I was reading the book and wondering, why are we even treating Cuba like an enemy? After all, they have not done anything to harm us. In fact, they have let us move in on their country and we profited from it during the Batista regime. But it goes back to the fact that the United States does not like change or a revolution if it does not benefit them in some way. With the communists like Castro taking power, the United States felt like they were being cheated out of something that did not really belong to them. There was no earth-shattering revelations in Schultz's book because it is something we all learn in history class, but his book adds much detail to the already known facts. After reading the book, I felt very informed by Schultz's claim that Cuba is not as dirty as the United States wants its citizens to believe. I actually had a different opinion towards Cuba after reading the book, one that was more positive and optimistic. I agree with Schultz's claim that we should respect Cuba rather than the need to, quote, uplift them. I feel that the Cuban people wanted a revolution and they felt Castro was the right man to do it. While I don't necessarily agree with Castro's policies, I also believe the United States should have left Cuba alone. It is my own gut instinct that Cuba never posed a threat against the United States. I believe it was more paranoia in the United States of having a communist country just a few miles away from them. There were a few flaws in Schultz's book as well. While I agree with some of Schultz's views, I believe he was too harsh on the United States' policy towards Cuba at times. He gave me the idea that America is just a big bully and likes to beat up on smaller nations. I believe the United States did have some legitimate reasons to treat Cuba with some hostility, because they were best friends with our greatest enemy, the Soviet Union. There was always a slim chance that Cuba would conspire with the Soviet Union, much like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the United States and the Soviet Union was an inch away from nuclear war. Being an American, I do not like the idea of another American telling me our country is a bully. In essence, I think Schultz had some good points, and his book is a must-read for any historian interested in the Cuban Revolution or for anyone interested in the United States' relations with Cuba.